The topic is called Provide and Protect, and essentially estate planning presentations are pretty much the same no matter how you brand it, no matter how you title it. It's a matter of identifying in the simplest form what you have, property, who's important, people, what you would like to have happen, plan with that property for those people. And probably the most important thing is that when you include those people, yourself. Estate planning is primarily to take care of you, your husband, wife, your significant other during your lifetime, and then the distribution of the estate. And how many were here at the last presentation? Okay, so there's a fair number of you that haven't heard this. That I'm originally from Philadelphia, and when I came here to Orange County, I wanted to get some statistical balance, okay? And I did some surveys, I did some studies, and I found out that the mortality rate in Orange County is exactly the same as it is in Philadelphia, 100%. Okay, enough of that. So it's a matter of a process. When you understand those three things that I just mentioned, property, people, plans, then the next thing you want to do is probably incorporate a planner, because everything that I mentioned so far is not technical. It's just common sense. It's just that a lot of people don't take the time to drill down in terms of, well, I forgot that farm that I own in joint ownership with my siblings, okay? So that's important. And then the plan is, you don't say, I need a trust. I need a this. No. You simply you answer in your own language, in your own heart, here's what I'd like to see happen. All right? So Susie is going to go into the real meat and potatoes of the presentation. I'm just going to kind of blow through these first few slides here. And so we got the planning process, we've got the family information, and again, this is pretty standard stuff. I don't care the size of your estate. I don't care the complexity of your estate. And by the way, if your estate is above $11 million, we're not going to be talking about sophisticated how to avoid taxation. Because if your estate is under, husband and wife, under $11 million, you don't have to worry because you can both transfer $5.5 million, okay? So if you have, and I mean this in all seriousness, if you have an estate that is well above that, it's probably a good thing for after you to look at the basics, because again, it doesn't matter whether you have a $100 million estate or a $10 million estate. The points that I just mentioned out are they're consistent, they're the same. It's just that when you get up in that higher level, the way of transferring is very, very challenging, to say the least. And for those people, and for all people really, but for people who are facing serious problems like that, the good news is that the IRS isn't as bad as we make it out to be. For people who are facing those types of problems, the IRS allows you to, well, they say you can give it to your family, you can give it to the government, or you can give it to charity. And you can pick two. Think about that. And I don't care about all of the sophistication, all of the ways to get there. That's pretty well standard. But we're going to keep things basic. And so we got this family information, we got, and again, when you have this, when you're doing this thing of the people, property and plans, you want to set up some goals. And that's something that you should do. And again, it's not sophisticated. It's just saying, gee, I like to do this. Susie has Janie has some issues as far as managing money. Do I want to leave, and I have 3 children, do I want to leave her her portion outright to her? I don't know, but these are questions that you ask. And then the people who are involved, okay, are you, obviously, as the creator of whatever it is. And we're going to be talking about living trust. So there's the creator. A gal asked me, where is she, about what's the difference between a trustor and a trustee? A trustor is the creator of a trust. A trustee is the person who manages the trust. I do want to talk about, this should be incorporated in your plan. Because when we talk about estate planning, we say, okay, when I die, not if I die, when I die, thus and so is going to happen. But a lot of things can happen between now and then that, if not addressed properly, could significantly alter your plans. And one of them is what happens if during my lifetime something happens to me where I'm incompetent, all right? And these go by a lot of different terms, a lot of different names and everything, but basically it's where you give authority to someone to step in the event that you become disabled, whether it's permanent or just temporary, okay? And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but the thing that is, it's normally called a durable power of attorney for health care. I work at Mission Hospital, and they're asked all the time, do you have a directive, healthcare directive? When I did my estate plan, that was one of the big things about it. And I can tell you the truth that it was about 10 years ago, to be honest with you, that we did an update. We addressed all of those issues. And at the end of the day, Barb, my wife and I, and still to this day, we don't worry about it. It's done. We are living our lives with the full understanding that things are taken care of. And we want you to walk out of here with knowing that if you do not already have peace of mind about those issues, you can have it. So the durable power of attorney, there's some kind of a disposition of your health care and what that would involve. And, it talks about here a trusted person. If you're in major medical decisions, medications, operate. These are all pretty standard things, and we could probably spend a half hour on just this alone. We don't want to do that. We just want to move ahead, okay? Because the most important thing is, when you start looking at, let me see here. And these are things that my wife and I had to deal with my mother-in-law. Very, very tough decisions because she didn't have those provisions. And so we had to talk about her last weeks, her last days, nutrition, hydration. That was a startling thing for us when they said, it might be best she had a stroke, for her to just, we don't give any hydration. and we just feel that we're depriving. She's going to be in terrible pain. Well, the medical staff explained the whole process, and we felt better. But wouldn't it have been so much nicer if Mom had already determined that for us? And do you want heroic measures, advanced directives? So these are all things that are included in there you go again. All right, and then again, when we start looking at the property, you want to be all-inclusive. There are so many different things that are a part of our estate. And we need to just take all of those things into consideration. And so what I want to do is turn it over to Susie now, because we're going to get into the area of really the process of doing and creating your estate plan. Mm-hmm.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Susie Hatton, and I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for, 22 years now, and I do estate planning. I decided I used to do litigation, and I clerked for a federal magistrate judge and fighting with people all the time, and I really decided that I wanted to give service to people, and peace of mind really is what this is all about. And so it feels really good to give peace of mind and help people, because that's what this is all about. And so I also love quotes. And so my one quote for today is, do what you are doing. So just think about that. That was St. Teresa of Avila. And it's just about mindfulness and really focusing on what you're doing at the moment. And one of those things that you might want to be doing is your estate plan. So one thing that we want to think about, and just to go back to the healthcare directive quickly, because the terminology sometimes is confusing because people hear about living wills or power of attorney. So your living will, that part of it is where you're writing down what your wishes are. Do you want to be kept alive? You may have religious beliefs. You want prayers said for you. You may have certain instructions about how you want your body cared for. That's that part. And then the other component is where you're appointing someone, that trusted person, to make decisions for you if you can't. So in California, we don't really have those two separated anymore. We have what's called the Advanced Healthcare Directive. So it does both of those functions here in California. So the other thing that we're moving on to is property ownership. So this is really important because I run into all the time people that when I ask them, well, how do you own title to your house, for example? They don't even know. They're not sure, and then they say, well, is it joint? Maybe it's joint tenants. And do you know what that means? So actually in California, because we are a community property state, what that means is everything that you and your spouse acquire during your marriage, you each own half. And we're one of about 6 states that has this arrangement. And so how that comes into play, one way is basis. And capital gains taxes. So here in California, it is actually much better for you and your spouse to own your property as community property. And that also has that right of survivorship, just as joint tenants do. So joint tenancy just means that you each own a property together. You could have as many as you want. And if one of those joint tenants passes away, the remaining owners own that property 100% together. And so community property has those same attributes, that right of survivorship, but it's actually much more advantageous for capital gains taxes purposes to own property as community property. So that's one thing that you can think about as far as it really comes into play, especially if you own property that's not your home. Because your home, you do get the homeowner's exemption. A couple can have an increase in value in your home. You can combine your exemptions, so you can have a $500,000 gain in the value of your home, and then if you go to sell that, you don't have to pay the capital gains taxes on that amount. So maybe I'm getting a little bit too much into detail on that, but that's one thing. Tenants in common, what that means is you actually have a divided interest in the property. So you have a percentage. You each own maybe 50%. And so if one of those people dies, their percentage goes to their heirs. It doesn't go to the other tenants. So most people, unless you're in kind of a business arrangement or something, wouldn't own property that way. Sometimes people own property that way with their children because you want to divide that percentage. But what you want to be careful of is that what you really intended. Now, I came across someone recently, a business person who bought a property with his business partner, and guess what? They purchased it as joint tenants. And so I said, well, do you realize that if one of you dies, your business partner is going to own that 100%, and your family doesn't get anything? So maybe that wasn't what he intended. And then, so I went over community property, so we can go on to the next. So trusts and wills. So most people think of their will is what is going to control their assets when they pass away. And in many states, that is the case. But the thing is, California, we have unique laws here. And so often, we need a trust. And why do we want to have a trust? The reason is because here in California, we have this I don't know, we're unique in a lot of ways, but one of those is our probate process. So it's very expensive here. It's based on the value of your estate. Now, let's say that you have a home, you own a home, and that's the only thing you own. It's worth $1 million, and let's say that you have an $800,000 mortgage on that home. So do you think that would kind of help things or not? So the thing is, anything that is subject to probate that's worth more than $150,000, if you have assets in your estate more than $150,000, you will have to go through probate. So now let's go back to my example. Let's say you have the $1 million home, and let's change it a bit. Say you have a $900,000 mortgage. So you say, well, that's only $100,000, right? No, they don't count that mortgage. So even if your property is encumbered by debt, they go based on the value of the asset. So it's all set by a percentage set in the probate code. It's not up for negotiation. Your attorney that you would have, or your family or heirs would have to hire, is going to charge these fees based on the values of the assets. You also pay that to the personal representative of your estate in the probate court. So based on this example, how it works is it's 4% of the first 100,000, and then I think it's 3% of the next 100,000, 2% of the next, and 1% of everything else. And so how that works out, this example is $1 million. It's going to cost, between the attorney's fees and the personal representative, it's going to cost them at least $48,000 just to get that house transferred. Even if you clearly said in your will, I just want it to go here. And unfortunately, that's just how it is. The other thing, that process is public. So some people have private matters. They feel like they don't want this out in the public. And then the other thing is that it's a long process. It's going to take 12 to 18 months. And then what if there are other issues that come up? It could cost even more. And so that's why in California, we want to have a trust, especially if we have real estate, because that is just how we have to handle it. And so that's one way of just, it's kind of, I always think it's kind of funny. We just sign a piece of paper in the office, and then we sign a deed, and then all of a sudden you don't have to go through this. It's a very simple thing that you do, and it saves all that time and money and headaches for your family. Okay, so how does a trust work? It works a lot like a will, because you're going to put your directions in there. But I like to think of a trust as a bucket. I think that's the best way to think of it. And what you're going to do during your lifetime, because it's a completely revocable instrument, you can control that. So you're holding your bucket as the trustee, and the trustor, as Jim mentioned, creates the trust. Sometimes you hear the word settlor, trustor. Those are the same people. Those are the one that created your bucket. So you're going to hold your bucket. You're going to put all of your stuff into your bucket. All of your assets are going to go in there. Now, actually, I shouldn't say all. Some of your assets you are going to purposely want to leave out of your bucket, because it may be better for those to pass automatically outside of your bucket, such as an IRA account. Usually, we don't want those in your bucket because the tax advantages of having them out of your bucket are better, and they're not subject to probate as long as, very important, you have designated the beneficiaries. Now, if you say you just forgot to designate a beneficiary on your IRA, then guess what? That goes into your estate. And so that possibly could go through a probate process if you didn't designate. So that's something that you always want to be thoughtful of. And what if you, for example, you got divorced? Did you have your spouse on there? Maybe after you're divorced, you probably didn't want your spouse on there, but sometimes we don't think of these little details. And so that's something that is a good idea, just to go through all of your accounts and make sure you have the beneficiaries designated the way you want, and should it be in my bucket? So we put it in our bucket. Now, during our lifetime as the trustee, you're holding the bucket. You have complete control over it. You can take things out of your bucket. You can put them back in. You can change your bucket. You can repaint it, remodel it, change it any way you want. It's very flexible, so you still have complete control. So there are certain types of assets that should go in. Now, I mentioned the IRAs. If you have like a brokerage account or cash, those types of things, those should go in your bucket. And so then it's very clear when you pass away how those are distributed. And then the other thing too that Jim mentioned is, what if you become incapacitated? Who's going to take care of all of your assets? So this is when your trustee could take over, a successor trustee, and control all the things in your bucket for your benefit. And they would be using that fiduciary duty to you, not to just spend that money, however, but to use it for your best interest, to take care of you, how you instructed in your trust that you created. So remember, you still are controlling your bucket, really, because you've written down the instructions very clearly. So what else can your trust do? So it can be very simple. Some people just want a simple, it's almost like their will, and it just goes directly to their children. If they don't have children, I have people that I always love, well, if they don't have children, but they leave it all to charity, or maybe they want to remember a friend or something like that. So you're going to instruct where you want your things to go that you worked very hard for your whole life. So one thing Jim mentioned, estate tax deferral. Now, most of us now don't have to worry so much about estate tax. I do want to mention one thing. If you did do a trust maybe 10, 20 years ago, they did have to worry about estate taxes. So when the estate tax exemption, that means what you can pass without having to pay estate taxes. Say it was $600,000 several years ago. People had to set up their trusts in a certain way to try to, you can't really ever completely avoid estate taxes unless you left it all to charity, for example, but you can do things to help or defer estate taxes. So sometimes people have set up, you may have heard of like an AB trust or an ABC trust. And so sometimes I see people, I have one right now, they set up this trust many years ago, it's set up that way. Now, those trusts may have required, when the first spouse passed, to separate the trust, separate that bucket into two buckets. And the administration becomes more difficult. So once you do that, you've got a permanent bucket, okay? Now that bucket can't be changed. You're gonna put usually the deceased spouse's half of the estate, for example, in there. Now that bucket can't be changed. So once that happens, now it's its own little entity. It's gotta pay its own estate or income tax. You can only use the income, for example, during your lifetime of your spouse that passed away, and you've got to provide accounting, and you can't change it. You've got to abide by what was decided way back when. And so that may not be the best plan now. Usually it's going to work out the way you wanted it anyway, but I do find that some of these older trusts are created that way. Right now, we don't need to do that anymore unless you have a good reason to. And so my point is, if you have an older trust like that, it's a good idea to have someone look at it and review it and say, hey, you know what, maybe we don't need to go through all that dividing and splitting when the first one of the spouses passes away, because we just don't have to do that anymore to avoid the estate taxes. And so I have this gentleman now that they didn't do that. So now he's stuck with this ABC trust where his wife just passed away, and now they've got to divide it when it doesn't make sense. So that's one thing, avoiding estate taxes. Now, if you, as Jim mentioned, if you have a very large estate, maybe that still makes sense, or other things might make sense. The other thing would be, as I mentioned, to control, just to have control if you do lose capacity at some point. Dementia and Alzheimer's is a growing problem in the United States and in the world. And actually, it's one of the most costly diseases, I guess, because think about the difference between, say, you had a heart attack and you have Alzheimer's. If you had a heart attack, you're going to have medical costs. You may have some rehabilitation time, but once that is over, you can recover. You can make changes to your lifestyle and move on. But something like dementia, Alzheimer's, you're going to have ongoing costs. You're going to need personal care. You may have to go live somewhere else. You have to have people that, are looking after you. And so hopefully we all hope that we don't have to go to that point in our lives, but we just don't know what's in store for us. And so this is one way that you can plan. If that ever happens to me, I'm going to have this bucket set up. I'm going to have chosen somebody that I trust to help me with my finances, help me pay for that care that I need. Okay, and then what's another thing? Basically, as I've mentioned, you just decide where your estate's going to go. Now, there is some advantage sometimes to creating an irrevocable trust. Sometimes people don't have enough money, for example, to pay for the long-term care. So sometimes, but you do have to be really very careful when we go into an irrevocable trust, because that is that bucket, but again, you can't change it. So what happens is Medicare, does Medicare pay for long-term care? Does anybody know? It doesn't. You guys are very smart. So it really doesn't help you. There's a limited amount that Medicare will pay for if you have a medical condition and you're hospitalized because of that condition. They'll pay for a certain number of days. After that, you're kind of on your own. And Medi-Cal can take over, but you have to have less than $2,000 of assets. And so there are things that we can do with trusts to help you qualify for those. But honestly, I don't think it's the best option, because you don't have the array of choices that you have if you have planned for yourself ahead of time. So that's another thing. Special needs trusts run into quite often, actually, people that have children, for example, that have a disability that need that extra care. Now, if their child is receiving public benefits, say they're autistic, for example, they're receiving some public benefits, they're not able to work or have, function on their own. So it's kind of the same. There's means-tested benefits where if that individual that's disabled has more than a couple $1,000s, they get disqualified from those benefits. And so say you have a son or a daughter and you have, a significant amount of assets in your estate. If you leave those directly to that person, they will get cut off from their benefits. Now, you may say, oh, well, it's enough. They won't need those benefits. So that's something that you would weigh. Do you have enough to provide for that person? But usually people want to protect those benefits. And so if that is the case, we can set up something called a special needs trust. Now, there's different types of special needs trusts, but in a nutshell, what you're doing is setting aside that pool of money that can be used for that for that person's benefit while preserving their public benefits. So those can work very well. And you also then can control who is going to be in charge of taking care of that person after you're gone. So that's very important. Okay, next one. Okay, so I kind of mentioned this. Hopefully I didn't confuse you with the capital gains exclusion before. So how that works is when we buy a piece of property, we have our basis, okay? Now, when you go to sell it, that increase in, hopefully, my house has hardly increased in value because I bought at the top and then it crashed and now it's almost back up. So, but anyway, hopefully we have an increase in value. So when you go to sell that property, that difference, that increase in value is what you might pay capital gains taxes on. So what we want to do, if you pass property by when you die, guess what? Currently, under our current laws, that beneficiary gets to step up the basis as of the date of death. Okay, so if you bought this house for $100,000 and you lived in it your whole life, it's $1 million. Gosh, you might not want to sell that because you're going to pay some hefty, could be 20% capital gains tax on that $900,000 gain. But if you wait and you're going to pass it on to, say, your children, as of the date of your death, say you died when it was worth $1 million, they get to step up their basis. So now it's $1 million. If they go to sell that right away, they wouldn't pay capital gains taxes. So does that make sense to everyone? So what happens in the trust, all of that's preserved. So you don't have to worry about, if I make a transfer, is it going to mess that up? It also does not mess up property taxes. So when we transfer your house, for example, into your trust, we will also be sure to fill out the right forms and notify the assessor's office that this is just a transfer to a revocable trust. So all of your property tax basis will stay the same. It doesn't qualify as an official transfer as it would if you were selling your house. So that's good. We can also create incentives. Now, a lot of people with children nowadays, I think it used to be, my children are young. I have 3 children, 9, 11, and 13. So they're still, good kids, I think. But they haven't gotten into trouble yet. They're still, but a lot of people that I meet with, they have older children. And I think the standard used to be, well, when they're 21, if anything happens to me, they can have my estate. But what I find nowadays is people are saying, well, no way could that person handle the significant sum of money at that age. And so most people I find are making that age 25 or 30, 35. And what you can do is you can set it up so that they get in stages. Maybe they get a little something when they're 21, they get another half when they're 25, and then they get everything when they're 30. But the other thing is incentives. So I do also have people that say, well, my son is using drugs, unfortunately. He would just waste all this. It would go into his drug fund. And so what we can do is put in the trust. That person does not get their money unless they go through a drug testing, if the trustee suspects that that's a problem in their life. A lot of people feel very strongly about education for their children. I don't know if anybody has people that are college-age children or even grandchildren, but they don't want to just give money to this young person who then may just say, well, I don't need to go to college. I don't need to work. I don't need to get a job. And it's not good really for that person, for their life. And so what you can do is say, well, as long as you're a student, you can be supported by the trust. But if the minute you drop out of school, you don't get anything until you're a certain age. You could also say, well, when you get a college degree, you get a lump sum or something, or you get a percentage. So there's lots of things that we can do. Really, anything that you feel is important, that you want to incentivize in someone's life, as long as it's legal. We have to be legal and follow the laws, but anything that you want to encourage, we can do that with a trust. So a lot of times people say, well, this is my trust. Do I even need a will? This is all of my assets anyway. But we still, even if you have a trust, you still need a will. And then sometimes if people don't own real estate, they don't own a lot, I would tell them, you don't actually need a trust. You can do everything with a will. And sometimes I have people that go to seminars and things, and they're kind of encouraged to sign up today. Everybody needs a trust. Well, you may not need a trust. So just to be careful of those things and really evaluate what your assets are. But let's say you do need a trust. You still do need a will. And what it is, it's called a pour-over will if you have a trust. And so remember that bucket. What your will is going to do is when you pass away, anything that happened to not be in your trust gets poured into that bucket. So it's like its own little bucket that gets poured into the trust. And so then everything is distributed uniformly, okay? So now, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, in California, the requirements for a valid will are a little different from a trust. A trust, you just have a notary acknowledge the signature, and it's legal. It's just a matter of verifying that you are the person that is signing the document. A will, we need to have 2 witnesses, and they need to watch you sign the will. They don't have to know what's in the will, or they don't have to know your private business, but they do need to say that you are competent that day. Nobody's holding a gun to your head or telling you you have to sign this. People always kind of joke when their witnesses come and they see that little provision about competent and of sound mind. They always kind of joke about that. But that's really the point of the witnesses, to make sure that you knew what you were doing at that time. And proper execution. Yeah, so I do even have families, unfortunately, that things have fallen apart and children are fighting amongst each other. Other children, they may feel, are influencing the parent. So it is actually pretty important because these things can be challenged down the road. So that's the legal requirements. Actually, there is in California what we call a holographic will, which is a handwritten will. But I do recommend you have somebody help you with all of this stuff. So we really remember those incentives. Most people, I think, really want to help their children to be, what they want them to be. And if, for whatever reason, unfortunately, you're not going to be there anymore, this is helping them through those incentives and maybe just giving them, your estate, passing down your estate that you worked for your life, passing it down through the family. You remember we can stretch that over time. Some people I've run into are beneficiaries of a trust, and their parents, for whatever reason, never gave it to them outright. They just set up the trust for their whole lifetime just to provide support. Those people are usually mad about it because they want to have that money. But for whatever reason, their parents said, no, I'm going to keep control for your entire life. And you just get to be supported by the trust. And actually, you know what? Even if it makes someone mad, maybe that is a good thing, because when you have a big pot of money there, sometimes it can be very tempting to just I'm going to buy a new car. I'm not going to save this. And even if I get taxed on it, it doesn't matter. I just had that money that I didn't have before. And so sometimes that is a good thing to create incentives and just really doing, because, when you're here, you can provide your advice, you can provide your incentives maybe, but when you're gone, you really can't do that other than maybe through money talks, I guess, right? And Charles Dickens, it's my other quote, said, "No one is useless in this lifetime." Well, this is the gist of it. Hopefully I'm getting it right. No one is useless in this life who has lended a hand to help another. So even if maybe you don't have very much money or a large estate, maybe this little thing that you can do to help someone.
Does anyone know, heard of this guy, what's his name, Warren Buffett, right? Does anyone know how much he's given to his children? No, I heard it was $4 million. All right, I don't think it's not. I think he's doing something for them. Let me put things in perspective, okay? Born in Philadelphia, row home in Philadelphia. My dad worked in a warehouse for Wyeth Laboratories. We got nothing when my mother and father passed away. We didn't have anything. Had I gotten $4 million, it would have been incredible. Now, for Buffett's children, he may say, well, wait a second, Dad, you're worth $18 gazillion, all right? Everything's relative. But it's his plan. It goes back to what I said from the very beginning. All the technical things, all of the sidebars and sidetracks and stuff like that, if you stay on the basic plan of people, property, plan, the planning part can get pretty hairy. Some children that you say, oh golly, do I have to give something to so-and-so? And then the other thing that we miss, and I think most of you are probably from the generation where our grandparents would say, it's just automatically going. When I die, it just gets spread out with no consideration for the impact that legacy has on the people who are receiving it. We're starting to see more and more contemporary people saying, okay, what is this going to do for my children, for my grandchildren? How can I incentivize them? Not only from the perspective of stop, you're going to kill yourself doing this with drugs. Whereas I'm going to encourage you. You probably know, maybe even here, people who have very, very significant commitment to children and grandchildren for college. That is an incentive. That's making a significant impact with your estate on the future generations. And you want to talk about leaving fingerprints that last forever? That's powerful. So we're seeing this current generation be a lot more sensitive to the plan of, okay, let's do it this way. Let's principal income, stretch it out over time. A whole lot of things which I would venture to say 25, 30 years ago wasn't in a conversation that attorneys would have with their clients. It's becoming more and more, because we have seen the results of that mentality where everything goes to the family. And we've seen it maybe in our own families or certainly in our society. So kind of an interesting phenomenon. Bequest. Well, hold it, wait a second. Okay, bequest. I just want to go over this real quick because it's, again, not very complex in terms of what you leave, because it can be a fixed amount. I leave to my children X dollars. Could be specific property. Here we get a little bit more involved, like with the whether it's a business. I'm dealing with a person right now who definitely wants to have their business, which is a pretty successful real estate investment corporation. And there are several children in the family. And so the problem is not all of the children are enamored, are engaged, okay? So these are some of the planning things as far as, okay, some specific, a percent of residuary. we see this more often in the charitable arena. What will happen is people will say, you know what, I'm going to give this, and this to family. I'm going to give this to good friends, whatever the case may be. And whatever is left over after those specific bequests, I do want to do something for my university, for my church, for whatever touch. You know, it's a matter of passion. You have a passion for I would hope, for your family, but a lot of people are expressing their passion through philanthropy and through a very wide variety of organizations. And so many times, just once to say, you know what, I feel peace of mind that I've taken care of all of these. Now I have these 3 or 4 organizations, and whatever is left, I want to just divide it equally. And contingent beneficiary, well, as the name implies, the beneficiary in this scenario is contingent upon some other event. More often than not, we see this with younger families where, young children, whatever the case may be. And if you do not plan for it, even though it's remote, common disaster, okay? Everyone dies. I mean, we've heard of families dying in the fires, and no one would have thought. Unfortunately, it does happen. And if your plan is silent on it, then someone else is going to determine. So contingent beneficiaries or bequests just makes a lot of sense when you look at covering all of your bases. The probability is so remote, but it can happen, and you need to plan accordingly. Now, again, people, sometimes I have seen cases where the children are better off than the parents, okay? And sometimes the children say, you know what, this is going to make if you give me what you're planning to give, it's going to change my situation significantly to the negative, okay? And so people are more apt to do things for charity. The thing is that with anything in terms of a trust, unless it's an irrevocable trust, you can change your mind. And this happens all the time. But one of the things that I've experienced in my 40 years in charitable, tax planning, when people make a gift, a legacy gift to charity, unless that organization has gone way off course, like Harvard, okay? Harvard was a seminary, okay? It was developed for to train pastors and everything. Unless the organization has gone way off course, about 98% of those charitable bequests are realized. Can be some very creative tax planning when you look at some of the charitable trust. And we're not going to go into great detail. The next slide will talk about a charitable trust. But this is something where if in the plan you want to do something for charity, some of the alternatives and options are very creative and very tax-wise very smart. And then you want to achieve something. The joy that I get out of working in philanthropy is working with people who have a passion for the college, for their church, for some mission group. This is their passion. And there's nothing that gives me greater joy than at the end of the planning process, they're making a gift to something that's important to them. That's the bottom line. And so there's so much to be done in the area of bequest to charity. One of them that I wanted to kind of share with you, I love this thing. And trust. You heard nothing but trust. This is another trust, right? I call it the Give It Twice Trust. The technical name is the Charitable Annuity Trust. I don't like technical names because it doesn't say anything. A Give It Twice Trust says something. Here's what happens. Normally it's done testamentarily when you die. Say, gee whiz, I'm torn because I want to do something for charity. I want to do something for my children. I'm not so crazy about dumping it all in their laps at one time. And then I'll ask people, when we have this conversation, I said, what if there was a way you could provide a legacy to your children, let's say for 20 years, and then thereafter create a legacy for the charities that you love? And I said, well, gee, I didn't know I could do that. Well, the answer is yes, you can. And it's done through what is called a charitable annuity trust. And it's another trust. But what happens is that the trust is set up, and then income is paid to the income beneficiaries, i.e. your children, for 20 years. And then at the end of that time, that trust is terminated, and whatever is left in the trust goes to charity. Give it twice. And normally the numbers work out that the amount that the children have received over that period of time just is almost the same as the lump sum that is going to charity. So the old term of have your cake and eat it too, this is a wonderful planning tool. Again, you don't use this in a vacuum. You use this in a conversation with an attorney where you're going through that whole process of people, property, plans, and you explore, gee, it'd be nice if we could do thus and so. And unless you have that, if you don't have that conversation, and there are some attorneys that don't even go in this way, they're kind of straight and narrow. They don't look at some of the alternatives that, oh, would you like to do thus and so? Yeah, and here is one answer. Here's another interesting thing. Again, philanthropy has to be from the heart. I don't care how many seminars you go to, how attractive someone speaking makes a charitable plan. If you don't have philanthropy in your heart, it's not going to connect, okay? However, where philanthropy does connect, this is kind of interesting because we talked about the IRA as a unique asset. And one of the things that makes it unique is the fact that it's all been deferred. And there's this thing called income in respect of a decedent. That sounds kind of fancy, doesn't it? It's just another tax, okay? And so I'm not going to go into details about how, why, and when and everything, but just consider this. If you have an IRA, and we deal with people who have large IRAs, and it's kind of challenging. But if the scenario is that you have an IRA and you have children, you have other assets, and you normally think, well, I'm going to split everything equally between children and charity. You might want to give serious thought to having the bulk of your charitable giving through your IRA, because when it transfers to children, it could be a taxable event, okay, through this income in respect of a decedent. However, that same asset transferring to charity, because it's charity, there are no tax implications. And again, I don't want to go deep into the details. I just want to throw it out there as, oh, I didn't know that. Every estate planning is like snowflakes. They're all different. The situations are different. The tools that might be used are the same, but your situation is an entirely different situation. Even though you might have the same estate size, same family composition, there are so many alternatives and things that change. But just kind of keep that in mind, that that's something to, we've talked about all the hard stuff, but you also come into these things which could be in our family. And when I say my wife's family, mom's Hummels. Dare I say anything more? Mom wasn't equal in all that because she lived out here. We're originally from Philadelphia. She was from Philadelphia. We moved out here. She moved out here. But anyhow, Barb and I have all the Hummels, and they're virtually worthless. And her three brothers are just happy, okay? But, you do have these things that jewelry, silver, and these are items that might be best cared for through a separate item or a separate, help me on this. There's a special.
Just a list,
Yeah.
you know, a designation of who you want. You know, I want my son to receive my Rolex watch, whereas I want my daughter to receive the crystal from our wedding, or you know, whatever it might be. And incidentally, this can be very flexible over your lifetime. You can attach, if we set it up this way, a handwritten note to your will or your trust so that you can easily change those things as long as you sign and date it. And it can't be something, you know, you can't leave your Maserati that's worth, how much are those worth? I don't know, a lot. But it has to be a smaller item. But that's definitely something that you can do. And a lot of times people, I find they just say, well, I want them to just, they're going to have to work it out. I want them to work it out. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's almost purposeful. Like, I want them to have to get along and work this out.
You might want to handle the last bullet there. Go ahead.
Yes, and also I did want to mention too, with personal property or just your legacy. I always like to think about, or have people think about, other things that maybe is not something of monetary value, but family value. What is really your legacy that you're passing on? Maybe it's, gosh, if you like to cook, I love to cook. And, you know, I come from farm families. And so, you know, there's recipes of my grandmother and my aunts and that have been passed down to me, maybe even handwritten by that person. That's just really neat to have, you know. So think about stuff like that too, that you might want to pass to your family. And also, I also recommend, if you want to avoid that fighting after you're gone, maybe if you're getting older, you just think about, just give it to them now. You know, just take care of that. Then they don't have to worry about it when you're gone. Another thing too that is new in 2017, we're getting towards the end of 2017, but digital assets. Now, sometimes seniors they're not real computer savvy, although I know a lot of seniors that are very computer savvy. You may have social media. You look like a very active crowd here. So maybe you are into social media. You may have stored photos or documents on that cloud storage. I'm kind of mind boggled by the whole concept of what is the cloud and how is it holding all my documents? Where is that cloud? But anyway, if that's a very big part, and it's becoming more and more a big part of our society. Well, this year in California, our legislature passed a law that allows our executor of our will and our trustee our power of attorney. We didn't really mention financial power of attorney, but all of those things can be, the digital assets can be handled by your trustee or your executor. And very important, because otherwise, you know, if you do set up a digital account, they always ask you to agree. They give you this big thing that nobody reads, and then you say you agreed and you read it, right? Or did you really read it? So otherwise, that's the terms of service agreement, and it may say in there that when you're gone, they can just delete everything, or nobody can access
I just have one
it.
quick question. How many engineers are in here? They read it.
They read it. Well, I mean, I'm an attorney, and gosh, I have to confess, I don't read any of that stuff. Who has time to do that? So, but it may have said in there that your heirs or something, they don't have any rights to it. So now what's a really good thing in California is that if you designate that as part of your estate, then your son or daughter or whatever can go and maybe access those photos, those family photos that are stored in a cloud, or if you had a business or something, all of your documents that you don't want to lose. So that's a good thing that's new here in California. Okay, so just to summarize, remember, title to your property is very important. I just can't count how many times I ask people, do you have the deed to your property? Because I need that. And gosh, no, I don't have no idea where it is. I don't know how we hold title. But really, just education, and it's pretty simple. If you don't have it, we can easily get it. And just to know what's going to happen if something happens to me, that knowledge that's power and peace of mind for you. So know how you own your property, how your beneficiaries are designated. Maybe you didn't even think about it. Estate planning. Some people do compare or complain, I guess, about the cost of estate planning. And I think the statistic is about 35% of the population actually has an estate plan. So that's, more than, what is the fraction there? About 2/3 of us just don't deal with it, and they just assume this, the laws are going to protect everything. It's going to go where it's supposed to go. But that little investment, whether it's a few $1,000s now or whatever it costs you to take care of it, think how much that's going to save your family, not just monetarily. Remember that probate process. That's a huge thing in California. How much is that going to save just in the trouble and the struggling after, when they're grieving anyway? If everything is organized and set, the way you directed, it just saves a lot of money and hassle, mental struggling, okay? And also, speaking of the charity, I love it when people want to remember charities in their estate plan. I think it's a really good thing, and it's a way to make an impact on the lives of so many people, including your family, and still take care of your family. I also love those charitable remainder trusts because I just feel like everybody wins. You're still taking care of your family, but you're also, leaving your stamp and, your legacy in the community and just helping a lot of people.
Well, the interesting thing is that with the charitable legacy is that it does make an impact in our community, but more importantly, it's a message to our children and grandchildren that there's something beside you. All right, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's something that's sorely missing in our society today. Just little sidebar there. And I've been in this business for 40 years, and and I have to, your best chance to provide and protect. I don't know how to say this other than perhaps a sad statistic is that when I do a presentation like that, when we do a presentation like this, we know that probably 80% of the people are going to say, that was nice, and they fall into that 2/3 who really haven't done anything, or it's been 20 years since they've done anything, and they don't do anything as a result. They'll go to another seminar. And I don't mean to be picking on people, but engineers tend to be that way. They'll go seminar. I want more. It comes a time where you have to do. Because I guarantee you, you will have peace of mind that, you know what? I've gone to these seminars. I've heard all of the stuff. I know what the basics are. I'm going to make it happen. And set yourself a goal. We're going to make it happen by such and such, my birthday. And not that your birthday is next August, okay? But that's a goal. End of year is certainly reasonable to get the plan rolling. And that's the hardest part because, as I said before, all right, 100% mortality rate. We don't like to talk about it, but we have to. But we don't have to dwell on it because that's not healthy, okay? I'm alive today because of medical technology, okay? I've got 8 stents. I've got a new heart valve 4 years ago. And so both my parents died young, and I think every day for me is a gift, all right? I don't take that lightly. But I don't dwell on it, okay? But I've made plans so that I'm assured that when I die, not if I die, I used to be in the insurance business a long time ago, and they drilled me when you're at the table with the husband and wife, and you say, and if you die, thus and so, you know. I've come to reality as far as the thing there. Now, Susie has prepared this. You will be expected to memorize it because there's going to be a test on this. But again, this is something, it should be on the last page there, okay?
It's very small, I think.
Yeah, it's microscopic. It's also an eye test. But no, it is designed to spur you on. But just remember this. This is presented by the Emeritus Institute. We're not in here for anything other than to provide resources for the Emeritus Institute. If you want to take the next step, you say, gee, I'd like to talk to Jim more about whatever. I'd like to talk to Susie. I'd like to talk to an attorney because we have other attorneys that we work with. You will go through Dan, through the Emeritus Institute and say, I took serious Jim's, elbowing to get it done. And there's no cost to you. But there is a cost if you don't do anything. And we would much rather see you not, your family go through that expense. Now, we said that there was going to be a time of question and answer. Now's your time to barrage us. Questions, please. Oh, you got it in the back.
Putting stuff in your bucket. Isn't it easier to do a POD on bank accounts and I-bonds?
Okay. In your bucket, isn't it easier to do a POG?
D.
D.
Payable on death.
Payable on death.
It depends. Yeah. So what payable on death, for example, on a bank account means is when you pass away, it just automatically goes to that person. So yes, it could be easier. Now, those are not perfect situations though, because I drive people crazy actually with what if. I just constantly, well, what if this happens then? And so what if in that circumstance, let's say you have more than the probate amount, say you have $200,000 in a CD that you're just saving, and you have a payable or transfer on death designation. And maybe you just did one, you didn't have a contingent, but so what if that person's gone? What if they're gone when you die? Guess what? That's going to be in probate. So yes, they go automatically, they pass outside of probate, ideally, but you just want to do it thoughtfully and make sure that you have contingent beneficiaries if that person you designated is not there.
But an excellent question, because and it's also, you have payable on death for bank accounts, and you have the same mechanism for trust accounts. You get, brokerage accounts. We got a question here.
The reason why we don't need an ABC trust?
I'm sorry, what was that?
She mentioned that we don't need any more ABC trust. The reason.
So the question is, why don't we need an ABC trust anymore? Well, you may not. So, but if your estate is under that almost $11 million for a couple right now. So back when you may have created that, the estate tax exemption was maybe $600,000. And so what that did, that ABC trust, is kind of complicated to explain, but what it did was they separated part of the estate and set it aside so that the estate tax, you would get credit for paying it, but it's deferred until the second spouse passes. It's kind of complicated what you had to do. But the whole purpose was to save estate taxes. And so now, if you can pass, because we have something called portability, where each person of a couple can combine their estate tax exemption. So as we've said, you can pass almost $11 million without worrying about the estate tax. Why do you want to go through all that trouble of losing control of a part of your estate for that it's all about the surviving spouse, really. Flexibility for that person and ease of administration. Do you really want to be paying filing two tax returns? Because you'll have your personal tax return and then you have your trust tax return. And the other thing is the tax rate on a trust. So once a trust earns more than $12,500 in income, say you have it invested, so once it earns more than that, the trust tax rates are really terrible. It gets bumped up to that 39.6%, the highest tax rate. So it's not always to your advantage to have that separated irrevocable trust. And I just find for most people with a smaller estate, it just works better to have maybe the option of separating if it makes sense, but not a requirement.
Got a question here.
Yeah, let's say you have a daughter who's married, and you want on your death, you want to not pass cash to her because then it becomes property of both of them. Does it make sense or does it work if you have the beneficiary of her trust? Make a trust up for her and then put her share of your trust into her trust. Does that remain her personal property and not the husband's?
Well, yes, that's a good. So he's saying, so basically, once you leave a gift to someone, like your daughter, for example, you've given it to her. And so, gosh, if something happens to her, it goes to the husband, maybe, if they don't have a trust. And incidentally, though, an inheritance is separate property of the spouse, of your daughter, for example. But most people in a marriage tend to commingle their assets, and once it becomes commingled, it's community property. And yes, the husband, which you may not, maybe you don't like her husband or something, yes, it does go to him. So what he's asking is, does it make sense to have a trust for the daughter that remains separated? So that would be one way, yes, to continue to keep her inheritance separated, and maybe you say, I want to ensure that it goes to my grandchildren, to her children. I don't want it to go to her husband if something happens. So you can either do that, her trust, if you want to give it to her, but the thing is, she would have control over her trust. She could always change that. So if you want to keep control, what you would do is keep it in your trust for your daughter's benefit for her lifetime. And then if something happens to her, then it goes to her children, not her husband. So that's the way that you can keep control over it. Does that make sense?
What happens if there's a family debt on that side? Can they get at the asset of her trust?
Well, I thank you, because I forgot to mention that. But yes, as long as you have it set up, it's called a spendthrift provision in your trust, you can shield creditors from those assets. And you can require the trustee to, if there's creditors coming after, to hold that in trust and not pay it out. So yes, you can take care of that issue.
Byron?
That would be in the trust you established for her.
No, that could be in your trust, as long as you're holding in your trust, the gift.
Got it. She's got it.
Oh, if she got it, then yeah, you really lose control of it once it's out of your trust.
You know, the interesting thing about all of these is that it gets down to the bottom. What is your plan? And rather than saying setting up trust and say, this is what I want to have happen. I want it to go to my daughter. I don't want anyone to get near. And so then it's the attorney saying, you know what? Here's the ways you can do it. And so, but that's a very valid concern. Byron, you're on.
I know this is a horrible way to get any kind of financial information, but
Something I heard on the radio the other day had to do with your capacity to qualify for long-term Medi-Cal insurance
Storage.
without spending down your assets. Do you know anything about that?
What's the question?
How to qualify for Medi-Cal insurance without spending down your assets?
Or Medi-Cal long-term insurance.
Long-term.
Medicare only pays for X number of days. If you don't have a long-term care insurance policy, basically you're running based on your assets down to the 2,000 line. There supposedly is some way to qualify under Medi-Cal without having to spend down the assets.
Well, so how to qualify for Medi-Cal without spending down your assets, that it really does get very complicated and you want to just be careful. But I think what they're probably talking about is there is a way to create but it's an irrevocable trust again. So,
Listening to you, that's kind of what,
yeah.
I kind of thought that's what the game plan was.
And there are the statutes, they look back for a period of if you're giving everything away, they won't let you do that. And so it can be very complicated. And I always just say, yes, that might be a viable option, but just be very careful and get some really good advice.
We're going to switch to this side. We got a lot of hands over here. Yes, ma'am.
If your estate is less than 11 million and you don't have to pay estate tax, what happens with the state of California? Do you have to pay tax to them or no?
So we don't have an
Question?
estate. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
We're
So she
learning.
says, if you're as a couple, estate is less than 11 million, and you don't have to pay federal estate taxes. What happens with California? We don't currently have a California estate tax. That could always change, and you know they're always, of course, right now looking at even on the federal level, just eliminating the estate tax altogether, and maybe at that point, what happens with California, we don't know. So
I will almost bet after they bleed the new gas tax that they're going to go after your estate. But current law. All right, we're going to come back here. Yes, ma'am.
About the pour over will that cover if you doesn't have contingent beneficiary for either bank account or brokerage accounts?
So the question is, a pour over will that cover if you didn't designate a contingent beneficiary for your brokerage accounts, for example? So yes, it covers everything, including, say you went out and bought a condo and then you never had a chance to put it in your trust, and then the next day you die in an accident. It would cover that, but the thing is, you would still have to go through probate. There would be a probate process if it is that, remember that monetary limit of $150,000. It still has to go through probate, but at least it gets poured into the will, or I'm sorry, into the trust, so there's clear instructions about it. So it still is very important to take care of that.
But if it's poured over to the trust, why would it go through the probate? If it's in the trust, it shouldn't go to probate, right?
So because we can't, so there's something called a testamentary trust, which is a trust that you put in your will and you say, when I die, that's when I create this trust. So that arrangement, if it's poured over into the trust through your will, that's a testamentary trust, and those have to go through probate.
Set up.
Yes.
Living trust.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Set up for the properties, and then you also have a will, then will that situation avoid probate?
Well, it will but you're saying, she's saying if you have the trust, a revocable living trust and a pour over will, can you always avoid probate? Well, that's what I'm saying is not necessarily, and that's why you want to make sure, because if it's something that should be in the trust and it's not in the trust, yes, that will is a catch-all. It's going to pour it into the trust, and the probate process is going to be more simple, but you still have anything that happens by virtue of that will, even if it's just pouring into your existing trust, will have to go through probate.
I think that to clarify things is that whenever there's anything, when you set up your living trust, we talked about, you put all your stuff in there, and there's some stuff that you don't put in there, okay? One of the stuff that you want to put in there are all your bank accounts, and all, even if they're payable on, because what happens if you have it payable on death, if it's in your name in any way, your name is Jane Doe, okay? It's going to come back to you, Jane Doe, unless it was put into the Jane Doe trust, once it's in the trust. Now, here's another illustration. How many people play the lottery? Nobody. I'm in, wow. Okay. Man, you just knocked my illustration. All right, an honest man. Wow, what do I do now? But let's assume that you did, and then you hit, all right? You hit it, and it's gazillion dollars, and the shock the day afterwards, you die, okay? Now, that asset, the ticket was in the name of Jane Doe. And so, the lottery, we got to give it to Jane Doe. They're not going to give it to Jane Doe's trust, okay? So the day before you bought the ticket, everything was perfect. You had all your stuff in the trust. But now you got new stuff coming in to your name, and you died before you had the opportunity to put it in. You see what I'm saying? So the key thing to remember is that what do you own? And if you do not own anything in your name, you're pretty well clear. Now, again, there's a lot of different variables that come in. You inherit something, like we said, if you were to receive an inheritance to your name, you have to then put it into the trust. So it's complex, and I want to move along, but I hopefully we're able to address it. And that's a serious, we got to go to this side of the room. We got questions over here? Oh, you have a question, I'm sorry.
Yeah. We had our trust set up when we were residents of Illinois. We traded blizzards for earthquakes. And one of the things we were advised to do was to set up the trust as the beneficiary of our IRAs. I'm confused about the consequences of that in terms of how the IRA would have to be distributed was the beneficiary of my trust.
Okay, so the question was, he set up a trust in Illinois, and now they're here, and they were advised to put the trust as the beneficiary of the IRA accounts. So there's kind of two issues there. I always do recommend, if you at least have an attorney look at your trust if you created it in another state. It should be designed to work anywhere, but we may have, laws can change. We may have some different laws. But the question about the IRA accounts, the reason why I don't think ever, unless you have a good reason to put the IRAs as the beneficiaries of the trust, is because, number one, a spouse has a great advantage of inheriting an IRA directly. You can roll that over and make it to your own IRA where you have the same tax advantages, the tax deferral. That's really the advantage of an IRA, is tax deferral. You can make it into your own IRA. Now, if you have the trust as the beneficiary, depending on how the language in the trust is, if it's not set up specifically for that purpose, that your family might have to actually just cash out, pay all the taxes right there, and not get that tax deferral. Yes, they would get the money from the IRA distributed according to the terms of the trust, but wouldn't it be better to be able to defer the taxes, to make it into your own IRA account rather than just having to pay a bunch of taxes now? So there are ways that trusts can be set up to handle that. And sometimes, I do, if people have young children that can't indirectly have an IRA, then that might be a reason to have the trust as the IRA beneficiary. But if your children are old enough where you want them to get the money right away, then I wouldn't recommend it. So
We had questions over. Yes, sir, you have had your hand up for a long time.
Two IRAs and two Roths.
Oh,
And 4 kids.
4 kids.
And a trust.
Okay.
I'm concerned that when we die, that they're not going to be able to divide up the IRAs and the Roths in an appropriate fashion. We have some kids that are wealthy and some kids that are poor. How is it controlled that these things are appropriately divided?
So he has IRAs and Roth IRAs and a trust, and 4 children, and concern about some of the children are more wealthy than others and concerned about how things are divided up. Well, you are in control of that completely. And some people they don't think about, their complete estate, and they think their trust estate is different from for example, their IRAs. And do remember that the value of your IRA, if you have it set up to go directly to the beneficiaries, remember that's separate from your trust. And so you're in control of that. So if you feel like, maybe some of your children, you want them to get a higher percentage, then you can do that directly through the beneficiary designations on your IRA account. And so maybe you want two of the children to get 60% together, or 30-30, and then 20-20, something like that, you can definitely do that. That it's all in your control. And so then you just want to keep in mind, and then sometimes people have, well, they want a certain child, they want them to get their house or whatever. So you can take care of all that. It's just you got to think about it now, while you have the chance. If I want, sometimes people want to keep their house in the family. You can do that too.
I'm concerned that when they finally get these Roths and IRAs, that if you're gonna split them up, that means they're gonna have to sell them at that time?
Well, that is a good. So he's concerned if they get the IRAs and they're just going to spend all the money, right? That they would sell.
Selling parts of it.
Well, what they do is the financial institution will just follow those. They will split up the assets by the percentage. And if it's your son or daughter, they can roll it over into what we call an inherited IRA. So now they will have to start, they'll still get some tax deferral. They will have to start taking out distributions over their lifespan. And actually, they can take all of it out, but they have to pay taxes on it. So
We're gonna divide it up this way.
Well,
We're gonna divide it up equally.
Well,
Some want to sell it, some want the money. some
but
want-
that's a complex set of circumstances, but it all kind of boils down, again, I hate to be repetitive, of part of you have the property, the people, and the plan. And your plan here is, this is what I want to see happen. And then it's the role of the planner to say, oh, here's how we can do it. You have a very valid and good question. We can't answer it right now, but there is an answer, because you want equity in terms of the needs of your family. And I would suspect that that's pretty consistent with everyone here. When you have a Roth, when you have all of these different assets, because each asset has a different characteristic. And the question you're asking is straight on, what's the best way to make sure it gets to where I want it to? But again, we have to just stay on that road there. People, property, plan. And in that plan is that you're not saying, I want to have this, I want to have that. This is what I want to see happen. That's the question. And then the attorney, the advisor, is going to say, okay, I understand. Here's several different ways you may want to use that. So again, thank you. Yes, sir.
His problem, IRAs and Roths are outside of the trust, correct?
usually, yes, IRAs and Roths are outside of the trust.
Okay, and so the way you control an IRA and a Roth is through the beneficiary.
Yes.
Yes.
So the beneficiary, his beneficiary has to swear to him he's gonna divide it up the way he wants. There's no way to control it.
No, because what he can say is, he said, you know what? He's going to say the beneficiaries are the 3 children, or the 4 children. And you either...
Beneficiary.
Yeah, because he can use many benefits. By the way, the last spelling, the spelling of my last name is F-R-E-Y. I can be a beneficiary.
For the trust, he's talking about.
I'm talking about, see, you're right in that there's 2 things here. A trust, which is determined, the distribution, by the terms of the trust. Whereas with an asset like that, it's the same thing with insurance, okay? When you have life insurance, anything that has a beneficiary arrangement, that trumps normally, excuse the term, that trumps the trust, because it's normally passing by terms of the beneficiary arrangement. And then you're setting up the beneficiary, you can say, I want to have 22 beneficiaries. You can do that because you're in control.
Is that an agreement between him and the contract with the beneficiary?
Well, the beneficiary may not even know. It's between him and the institute, the financial institution. Now, more often than not, they're going to say, hey, kids, here's what's happening. But they don't have to say. The kids can find out, wake up one morning, oh my goodness, this is what's happening. It's not the best scenario, but the point is that with that portion of the asset, that's going to be passing by the beneficiary arrangement. You had something to comment
No, I
there?
was just going to say, and when you do it that, once you give a gift, by a beneficiary, you have lost control of that, because if you're trying to keep your claw in it somehow, that's not really a true gift, right? You can't, here's my vase and I'm just going to hold this.
Yeah.
You know, you can't do that. You have to let go. And so that's what you have to think about beneficiary designations.
I want to
You've
make an
given
official
it.
announcement. We are officially done. We do want to thank you.